Welcome to No Holding Back with me, Susan Estrich, the podcast where I bring you the biggest names from the worlds of media, politics, and law. We dive into unfiltered, unapologetic, and insightful conversations. I speak my mind and I encourage my guests to do the same. No topic is off limits as we dive into the issues that shape our world. Joining us is Isaac Saul, an award-winning journalist, entrepreneur, and the founder of Tangle, one of the most trusted independent political newsletters in America. Isaac started Tangle with a bold mission to provide political news that's truly non-partisan, honest, and rooted in good faith. That's amazing. A rare and refreshing approach in today's media landscape. His work has been featured in publications like the New York Times, Time Magazine, the Huffington Post, Yahoo News, and he's been recognized and is one of the most influential young voices in journalism today. Isaac believes that better conversations, ones that cross political divides, are key to a healthier democracy. Through Tangle, his podcast, and countless media appearances, he's built a growing community of readers who crave nuance, not noise. That's a good idea. Today, we'll be talking about the state of media, how we can bridge political divides, and what it means to stay grounded and optimistic in a fast-moving, often polarized world. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Isaac Saul. Isaac, thank you so much for all you do and for coming here today.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Susan. I appreciate it.
Tell me about Tangle and why a young person like you with so many opportunities chose journalism and politics in this crazy world we live in now.
Yeah, sure. So I think I kind of have two Genesis stories, I guess you could say. I mean, I grew up in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, which, as you might know, is a swing county and a swing
Wayne
state.
County in
So
a swing state.
yeah, pretty important in the political world. So I kind of grew up immersed in, U.S. national politics. The CNN was coming to the diner around the corner from my high school when I was a kid. And I also grew up in a place that was, self-evidently politically diverse. So I had a lot of friends and family from across the political spectrum. And I went to school at the University of Pittsburgh and pursued journalism as a career and started working for the school newspaper and then working in the journalism industry after college. And I think I saw that, there was a disconnect between the stuff that a lot of the people from my hometown were reading and a lot of the stuff that the news producers, the journalists, the TV anchors, the media folks were producing. There was just a gap between what a lot of quote unquote normal Americans were kind of taking in and what maybe the professional media class was really interested in. And then there was the very obvious political divides. The first job I ever got was at the Huffington Post, which is a newspaper that obviously has like a left-leaning ideology. They're not shy about putting forward. And I realized very quickly that, only liberals were reading my work and not conservatives, and that people were kind of just in their own media bubbles and consuming news that kind of reaffirmed their priors. So had this idea for a newsletter to kind of try and be a big tent media organization or bring people from the right and the left under one roof, and to do it by sharing a wide range of opinions about the news of the day every day, and to say, here are the arguments, here's what the left's saying, here's what the right's saying. You guys can kind of make up your mind, and offering some of my own take and my own personal views and opinions in there as well, so I can call some balls and strikes when I feel it was necessary. Um, and it turns out there's a really big desire for that. I mean, we started this in 2019, and I sent my first email to 13 members of my friends and family. And today we have almost 400,000 people on our mailing list and
That's
a
wonderful.
full-fledged business. Yeah, we've really
How
grown.
did you
And
do it,
um,
Isaac? How did you get
well,
from 13 to 400,000? That's pretty amazing.
yeah, I mean, I think key to everything is the content. I think we offer a really good product. We are really transparent about how we produce the news. If we make a mistake or we need to correct something, we put it front and center at the top of the newsletter. We answer reader questions in every newsletter. We involve our community and the readers in the process of creating the content so people feel like they have a stake in what we're building. And, we're filling a need. I think a lot of Americans, despite how polarized we are and how extreme some folks are getting on the left and the right, I think there are an increasing number of Americans who are kind of independent minded. They don't want to be rubes. They don't want to be fooled. They don't want to just hear the news from one side, whether it's the right or the left. People are really stepping out, I think, with an interest in understanding the world as it is. And I found that, despite some of the stuff we see happening across the country, that worries me in terms of, just how extreme our politics are getting and how divided it's getting. There are a lot of people, and I think a growing number of Americans who really want to understand perspectives that they don't agree with, who really want to engage with perspectives that they don't agree with. They want to understand the arguments that maybe they know they're not hearing from the New York Times or from Fox News or whatever it is. And I find that refreshing and hopeful for the country. And I think our growth and the success of the business kind of proves that there's a lot of people out there who want what we're offering.
What do you think about Trump? I mean, Trump is the issue that divides us all, isn't it?
Yeah, he makes our job quite difficult. I would say,
I would say so.
yeah, on a personal basis, I mean, it's very interesting. I think during Trump's first term in 2016 to 2020, I very much understood and related to a lot of the things that he was talking about. I mean, I think he ran on kind of the hollowed out America, the forgotten American, the sort of Rust Belt being left behind, the outsourcing of jobs and manufacturing. He obviously ran big on immigration and, closing the border and these ideas that kind of oscillated between like the classic America first and then just classic xenophobia. And there was a lot there, at least in terms of how he approached the power centers, like a disregard for some of the norms that maybe had made us complacent or had gotten us to the point that we were that I appreciated. I'll never forget at one of the first debates Trump was at, him, everybody clapping for some line that Jeb Bush had and him just pointing to all the people in the front row and saying, it's just Republican donors in the audience. They're just all the people who paid for these seats who are pretending that they're, representative of the American public. I'd never seen a candidate for office ever do anything like that. And I was at home going, oh, I like that. Like, it's nice to see somebody kind of saying, this is how the sausage is made. I think his term ended in disgrace, and I said as much in Tangle when it happened. I mean, on January 6th, was the first non-peaceful transfer of power in United States history, and I think that should be a defining part of his legacy forever. And I never thought he would return to the White House. I certainly didn't expect him to have a political comeback. I think Trump's second term has been defined by totally different things that I have a much harder time with. I think he's on a revenge tour. I think he's interested in stretching the boundaries of executive authority as far as they can go. I don't think he has a great plan or a coherent plan for the economy, which was, before COVID, one of the few bright spots of his presidency. I mean, there was an economic agenda being executed, and it was actually quite successful in terms of jobs, GDP, growth of wages across groups, not just for the rich, but for lower middle class Americans, Black, white, Hispanic. All that's true. We're not getting that in this term. What we're getting is somebody who, by my estimation, just seems hell bent on, getting back at all of his political adversaries, extending his executive authority as far as it can go, and is trampling a lot of really important due process rights, civil liberties for American citizens, for non-citizens, for people who are here illegally, for people who are here with legal status. It's happening across the board, and that scares me. I think the confrontation with the judiciary scares me. So I've been much less enthusiastic or compelled by his second term. I think his first term I had a lot of mixed feelings about, even though it ended so poorly. I think this second term I've mostly felt really negative about. And I've said so to our readers and Trump supporters who consume our content, because my promise is to always be honest about what I'm seeing. And right now, I don't think we're better off in any real tangible way, aside from the fact that the southern border is now relatively under control, than we were when he came into office. And that's been really disappointing.
It's disappointing. How does that distinguish you from, say, MSNBC? Because I just agreed with everything you were saying about Trump's second term. And I mostly agree with MSNBC, although I spent years on Fox News as sort of the House liberal trying to convince the unconvincible. Um, where are you different right now? I mean, you
I
must
would
have some
say,
readers who were Trump supporters. Are they disappointed in you?
oh yeah, plenty of them are, and plenty of them are upset with me. I think that, well, first of all, the difference I think is that I was similarly very critical of the Biden administration. I thought he had a lot of failures. I thought his term ended very poorly, obviously. I thought,
Yeah, it sure
you
did.
know, a year into his presidency, I was questioning his fitness. A lot of liberal readers were really upset with me for that. I think that aged pretty well. So many things about his term I was critical of. So I think I earned the trust of a lot of the Trump supporters who read our newsletter and listen to our podcast. And so I think they're more likely to hear it from me. I think one of the ways that I maybe connected them a little bit more is that I can align on some of the goals or the stated goals of the Trump administration. I mean, to me, Trump's most core views that distinguish him from other politicians are that, he has prioritized immigration and limiting illegal immigration to the southern border. He believes that we should retreat in some ways from some of the kind of global authority and responsibility that we have, and that we should get more out of our allies. And he has a sort of nostalgia for a different economic era in America that I don't think is necessarily realistic, but I at least understand and appreciate. So I articulate that stuff while saying, the tariff plan has been rolled out in just like totally incoherently, and I'm not really sure what the plan is anymore. And I don't know that they can tell me. And so I think they can at least hear how I got there in a different way. And I would say, look, I mean, some of the things that I'm talking about and focusing on in the first 100 days, it might not sound that different than, a liberal commentator on MSNBC, but Trump is negative 37 with independent voters right now, and I'm one of them. So it's not just liberals who are upset. I mean, his approval rating has tanked among a lot of people in the middle, of which I consider myself. And so I don't think it's just, me aligning with some sort of liberal progressive view. I think a lot of moderates and independents, people who are not total all out Trump supporters, are actually quite disappointed and frustrated with how his administration has started, if not a little bit worried and scared. So I think it's reasonable to be there, even if you are somebody who's not, a staunch leftist or a Democrat or whatever it is.
Do you think he's listening? I mean, one of the things that's very frustrating about Trump, to me at least, is this sense that he just doesn't listen. He's on this retribution campaign. He's trying to get even with everybody. He's taking on the courts and the rule of law. He's taking on law firms that have done nothing wrong. He's taking on universities and trying to bend them in his direction. And all this stuff is unprecedented and scary, and yet there's no sense, to me at least, that he and his people listen to the criticism. Do you feel like they're listening to you?
I'll actually take it a step further and say that I think he not only listens, but I think there's a very Trumpian characteristic that he believes and subscribes to the last argument that he's heard. It happens over and over again. And I've observed it, something I've actually talked about in my writing. And it's kind of a theory that I think is sort of uniquely mine that I've put out there many times before, that once you understand this, it explains a lot of US policy. Recent examples to me include him leaving a meeting with Putin and Russia and starts calling or Volodymyr Zelensky a dictator, saying that Ukraine started the war, et cetera, et cetera. A week later, he's in the Oval Office after meeting with Zelensky, asked about calling Zelensky a dictator, and says, "Did I say that? I don't think he's a dictator." And then, goes off on this tangent about what Russia needs to do to bring peace after he's had this meeting with Zelensky. We have really good reporting on this from the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, that the tariff stuff, the on and off again tariffs, is basically a product of infighting that's happening on Trump's trade team. And the Wall Street Journal reported that it was literally Peter Navarro leaving the White House And Trump's Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, seeing an opening to corner him without Peter Navarro there and meeting with him one on one and convincing him that the tariffs were tanking the market and causing a bunch of disruptions in the bond market and all this stuff. And then Trump came out and just ended the reciprocal tariffs or paused them. And, like he responds to the last argument that he's heard. So I think that he is persuadable. I think the issue is that he's, working with a team of people who are really ideological and have a lot of different ideologies, which is good, but they infight and they backstab each other and they're all sort of angling for their own positions. And that creates, policies that I think are quite chaotic. So, um, I have plenty of things I could say about Trump that are more positive, but I think it's fair to call him maybe gullible in some instances. He has certainly subscribed to some conspiracy theories of the past. And like I said, I again see him responding to the last people that he's spoken to or heard from over and over again on all these really major policy questions. And when you notice the pattern, it's hard to unnotice it. So, I do think they listen. I think they worry about the criticism because they can't afford a midterm blowout. They can't afford the Supreme Court or the judiciary turning against them. That they have to worry about that voter sentiment to some degree. I don't think it's changed their position yet because a lot of voters still feel positively about the immigration stuff. So he's going to keep going harder on some of the deportations and the confrontations with the judiciary. I think we're seeing him back off the tariffs because he saw blowback about that. So I do think that's an important lesson.
What's he going to do about I mean, you have the Supreme Court with no dissents ordering Mr. Garcia's return, or at least ordering the federal government to facilitate his return. You've got stories now breaking every day about 2-year-olds being deported without their parents, about children, about families being separated. Is this what America wants?
Honestly, yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that the polling that we have, the access to the information that we have about Trump's handling of immigration is overall pretty positive. I think Americans don't want a president who disobeys court orders. They don't want a
Right.
president who ignores the Supreme Court. That polling is also really strong, and I think is sort of the distinction. But I do think we are living in an era of really strong anti-immigrant sentiment, which, by the way, speaking of Biden criticisms, I think is a product of the policy failures of the Biden administration. I mean, it's a simple fact that there's probably 4 to 5 million people who are in the country who came here illegally during Biden's term, which is more than the population of half the states in America. And people notice, in cities as far away as New York and Chicago, public services were overwhelmed. Shelters are popping up in public parks, budgets are being strained. It impacted a lot of Americans, a lot of American citizens in negative ways, and it created a big backlash against immigration that I think is a product of the policy failures of the Biden administration, which is a lesson that Democrats should remember is that, there's upside to controlling the border. If you want to pursue more legal immigration, which is actually a policy prescription that I'm supportive of, one good way to do that is to control illegal immigration so that Americans feel like the system is not being overwhelmed and the system's under control and there's space to allow more people in through legal pathways. Trump doesn't have any interest in more legal immigration, but because illegal immigration was so out of control under Biden, it's been really easy for him to pursue the immigration policies he's pursuing with the wind at his back and the support of the American people. And I wish more Democrats were talking about that. I'm not sure they've totally learned that lesson, but it seems pretty obvious to me.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, immigration has been a hot button in Democratic politics since I've been doing it. I mean, and that goes back a long way. And I think we have missed the boat in understanding the feelings of people, including legal immigrants, that things are somewhat out of control. On the other hand, how do you balance that with the courts right now? And the courts coming in and saying you can't do it this way. You can't just round people up without due process and send them all off to foreign countries. I mean, how do you square that right now? How would you square
Yeah, I mean, look, if I were a diehard Trump supporter who wanted to see him succeed in all of his endeavors and fully agreed with his entire approach to immigration, I would be upset right now and frustrated with him because I think what he's doing is basically the hardest possible way to pursue the policy that he wants to pursue. I mean, there was this meme going around on Twitter that was supposed to, sort of justify or back up what Trump's doing. And it was something like, listing the hundreds of millions of people or millions of people that were deported under Obama and Biden and Clinton, and then listing the number of like uh, court orders that had stopped their deportations or programs. And it was like Trump had the fewest deportations and the most court orders to stop them. And Trump supporters were sharing this meme as if it was, proof that the federal courts were somehow obstructing the administration's agenda, when really it's evidence of the fact that Trump is pursuing illegal or, potentially illegal pathways to execute his agenda. What he could do is deport people the same way Barack Obama did or the same way Joe Biden did, with some semblance of legal process and due process, and probably accomplish a lot of what he's doing. But instead, he wants to do it through executive authority. He wants to use the Alien Enemies Act. He wants to just disappear students into, who knows what prisons in what states, and then cancel their student visas and deport them over op-eds that they wrote in a school newspaper. I mean, he's not going after the big bad gang members he promised. He's not deporting the people who just came here under Biden illegally through some kind of legal known process. He's introducing a lot of volatility and variability. And as a result, he's being stymied. So again, if even if I were really supportive of everything he was doing and wanted him to accomplish all this stuff, I would feel like this was a pretty incompetent way to go about it. I mean, I don't think this is it is not that hard in our country to actually detain and deport someone. There's
Right.
so many systems set up to do it. Again, Obama, the deporter in chief, quote unquote, who deported millions of people when he was president, he did it relatively easy without much court obstruction by just following the law. So I don't really understand why Trump just can't do that. It is bizarre and frustrating.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you because why doesn't he do it legally? I mean, people who aren't in this country legally can be deported through legal process. Why is he insisting on doing it through these showboat tactics that land him in trouble with the courts?
I think, first of all, it's hard to ascribe intent to a man whose head I don't live inside of. I don't necessarily think there's clarity on these kinds of questions with Trump. I do think he has people around him like Stephen Miller and Tom Homan, the people who are seem to be the at the forefront of his immigration policy, who they really revel in pushing the boundaries of the executive authority. They revel in the fracas with the media. They revel in the attention. They want it to signal to the world that like we're putting the wall up and we're closing our doors and people are not welcome here. I think if I had to ascribe some kind of intent or strategy to it, I would say they feel good about the idea that they're sending a strong signal not to come here. And that's because they want less immigration. They want fewer migrants making the trip and trying to claim asylum. And they're seeing results at the southern border. I mean, whether it's a product of the deportations or just re-implementing some of the policies like Remain in Mexico that he had during his first term, there is a reality, again, that Democrats have to grapple with, that we have historic lows in terms of the number of border encounters we have on the southwest border right now. So I think it was something like 7,000 last month compared to 400,000 in a month at the peak of the Biden administration. That alone frees up a lot of resources for, the DEA, the FBI, the Border Patrol, all these people who get wrapped into and are sort of part of the process of arresting, detaining, deporting people who come here illegally. They feel relief when the border isn't the kind of chaotic scene that it was under Biden. So I think they feel like the whole of whatever they're doing is working, and so they want to keep it up. I don't think personally, as an American, it's worth sacrificing all the beautiful civil liberties and freedoms that we have as American citizens. I was warning weeks ago, to people who didn't seem to understand. look, if you don't give a non-citizen due process, then it is inevitable that American citizens will be caught up in it because if you get arrested and deported, how do you prove you're a citizen without due process? And now we're starting to get the first examples, obviously, of American citizens being arrested or detained or in some cases deported, which was predictable when you run the operation like this. So yeah, it's hard to ascribe some kind of intent, but if I could, that's probably what I would say.
What's he going to do next? What are his latest numbers have come down really low. You've got two polls out just recently showing his approval numbers in the 30s, the lowest for any president in his first term at this stage. He's calling the pollsters all criminals. He's already sued. Remember back with the Des Moines Register, he was ready to sue the pollster who came up with a bad poll before the elections. I mean, calling the pollsters criminals is not going to do it. What's his strategy for turning his numbers around?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to predict with him. I would say, again, the immigration numbers are strong enough that I would expect to see that continue. I think, unfortunately, we seem bound for some sort of crisis between the courts and the executive branch. I hesitate to call it a constitutional crisis. I think that can be an overused term, but there seems to be a game of chicken going on between the Supreme Court, these federal judges that, they arrested this county judge in Wisconsin now. They are
Terrible.
going, they're going all in on this immigration fight, and I don't think there's any going back from that. On the economic stuff, I would imagine, I mean, if I were Trump, I would be looking for ways out. I mean, announcing new trade deals, anything that can throw some gasoline on the market. I think they've gotten a few companies to commit to manufacturing here. They probably want an off-road, so they're going to have to negotiate some kind of deal. I think the best case scenario is we see a big bilateral trade deal with China or something with Japan and South Korea. Again, some of this is frustrating because we had some of these things in place before the Trump administration got rid of them. So the real test will be, is it a better deal than what we had before? Um, my fear, the thing that I worry about most is that in the past, with different presidents, in times like this, we've seen them sort of turn to maybe less than ideal tactics for uniting the country or pursuing some sort of different conversation about the administration, like starting a war or a confrontation.
A
And
war is
so
a bad idea.
yeah, no kidding. So I would say my big fear is that some of the saber rattling and stuff that we're hearing about Iran and, Trump sort of reaching out on this nuclear deal while also saying, we're going to threaten you with military strikes if you don't actually comply or enter this deal with any kind of sincerity. I mean, that stuff really worries me that they start a new conflict. It worries me, A, because one of the things I love most about Trump is that he really is one of the most anti-war Republicans we've seen in the last 30 or 40 years, at least in what he articulates. I don't think he lives up to that all the time, but he talks the talk at least. And B, it would obviously be really bad and dangerous for global stability to add another conflict to the Russia-Ukraine war and what's happening in Gaza and all the stuff we're seeing across the world in Africa and the tension in the South China Sea and instability in South America. Us having a hot war with Iran or Israel having a hot war with Iran would be very, very bad. So that's the thing that really scares me. I'm hopeful that we don't see that. He doesn't go that direction, but I would expect that they try and change the tenor of the news with some big trade deals in the next few months if they can land the ship, which I hope they can. But I'm not totally convinced that there's a real plan right now.
What does he do about Gaza and Ukraine? I mean, he's got two wars already. He said he would solve them, maybe even before he became president. Obviously, they're not so easy to solve. The Israeli war goes on. The Ukrainian war has got, what, a 3-day truce, but, you know, it goes on. What's he going to do about those? They're
Um,
not going away as easily as he thought they would.
guys, I'm so sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt. Isaac, are you just checking the clock? Are you okay for time?
yeah, I'm good till 2. Thank you.
Okay, sorry to
Okay,
interrupt.
great. I'll
Thanks,
get you
guys.
out
No
of here
problem.
by 2.
Just
All
do
right,
my
thanks.
producer thing. Thanks, guys.
It's well, first of all, on Ukraine and Russia, I think, the who's spoken to Trump last theory is alive and well. I mean, we just saw Trump was at the Pope's funeral. He had this meeting with Zelensky, and he came out of the meeting talking about Putin and how disappointed he was that Putin was bombing Ukraine in the midst of this alleged ceasefire and in the middle of negotiations and all this stuff. So, like, that's a great example of the kind of thing I'm talking about. Zelensky sort of gets the earworm and gets in his head and has sort of moved him a little bit. I have no idea what's going to happen there. It seems hard to believe or hard to fathom that the Ukrainian people would accept the annexation of Crimea in like a deal like this, which Trump seems to be hell bent on, is giving Russia Crimea and then, that being part of some peace deal. Zelensky said he wouldn't do that. Now there's reporting saying he might. Um, I think the odds of him finding a peace deal there are much better than in Gaza, where, in my view, what Trump is doing is far worse. If you're somebody who cared about the Palestinian cause or Palestinian rights, which a lot of Americans on the left said they did going into this election, I think the difference between the Trump and Biden administration is now self-evident. I mean, they are basically talking about this like Riviera of the Middle East where they're
I
going to
know.
force out millions of Gaza. I don't know. I mean, first of all, the Gazan people are never going to accept that. Also, neither is Iran or Egypt or Jordan or some of the Arab partners in the region. I mean, that's a way to draw them in is if you really go for the full ethnic cleansing of removing all these Gazans from the strip. At the same time, Netanyahu somehow has survived politically and seems to be shoring up some of his political authority. And he has a full green light from Trump to basically do whatever he wants to do. And I think we're seeing what he wants to do right now, which is continue this full court press. I mean, they're basically moving around these civilians with evacuation warnings every couple of weeks and then bombing the areas that they've moved them to and removing them again. And it just seems to never end.
And where does
The
it end, Isaac? Where is it going to end? Because I think a lot of people are worried that Trump has no end game.
I think the hope, the optimistic take is that we see some sort of grand Saudi-Israeli normalization deal, which is something that's been sort of percolating in the ether for a long time. And a deal like that, the Saudis could represent the interests of the Gazan people and the Palestinian people, perhaps propose some kind of Arab-led coalition to lead the region or to lead the Gaza Strip, and put forward some sort of two-state or pseudo two-state type solution that requires Israel to actually withdraw and stops what's happening on the northern border of Israel with Lebanon. Do I think that's likely? No, not really, but
Oh,
it's something that a lot of people are talking about. And, Trump did, despite, again, if I were going to talk about some of the really big strengths of his first term, he landed the Abraham Accords, which was a major deal for the region and was a huge positive, one of the crowning achievements of his first term. I hesitate to underestimate him, but I just don't feel like it's something he's particularly focused on right now. And with so many issues domestically and the war in Ukraine, it seems hard to believe that they pull it off.
let me ask you one last question because I know you have to go. You've started an incredibly successful political newsletter. We've got a president who is incredibly hostile to the media and has almost declared war on the media. Where does that go?
Look, my perspective on the relationship that the media has with Trump is sort of twofold. One is I think the treatment, the adversarial nature of the relationship is appropriate. I think it's how it should be. We don't work for the president. He has a well-employed comms team who, their salaries are cut with my tax dollars. That job is covered by somebody. My job is to be a critic, a skeptic. It's to call out lies and dishonesty and poor policy. It's not to cheerlead. It's not to talk about how great they are. So I respect the posture that the press has had towards him since 2016. If there was an issue with it, if I had one big issue with it, I would say they don't take the same posture with every administration. I think Obama in particular got much softer treatment from a lot of mainstream journalists. Hillary Clinton has always had a tough treatment from the press, sort of closer to Trump's. Biden was sort of somewhere in the middle. I wish we were all more adversarial with every administration. And, in my ideal world, that's what it would look like. At the same time, Trump loves the press. I mean, he feeds off it. He loves the attention. He loves the interviews. I mean, the Atlantic just dropped a huge profile about him today that basically, as the reporters tell the story, was born out of the fact that they reached out to the press comms team to get an interview. The comms team declined, said the Atlantic's fake news. We don't want to give you a report, whatever. And then they got the president's cell phone number, and these two reporters just called Trump directly, and he picked up the phone and talked to them for an hour. I mean, that is how he operates. So I think the administration is, despite all the huffing and puffing, they are relatively open. They're probably one of the most engaged administrations with the media that we've ever had in terms of access and how much press they give. The administration leaks like a sieve, so we always know what's going on. There are some pros to it. The downside is, yeah, Trump hates negative coverage, and he threatens to use his power to harm journalists or media companies in some way. I think the First Amendment is pretty well intact. We just saw Sarah Palin's First Amendment challenge before the
Right.
Supreme Court fail, or before the federal court fail.
Right.
Never even got to the Supreme Court. The CBS lawsuit, it's scary stuff to me, but there's just an element of it that feels performative. And so I'm not super worried about it. I would say I think the media is doing well right now. The reporting on this administration has been excellent from places like the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and Fox News. There's a lot of good reporting coming out. So I'm not scared yet, despite all the rhetoric from the president. He seems incapable of turning down an interview or picking up the phone, and I think that's just his nature. He's a man of the media.
Well, so are you, and you're a great one. So, Isaac Saul, thank you so much. You've been listening to Isaac. I want to thank you for joining me for such a thought-provoking conversation. I want to send everybody to your website. It's Tangle, right? Tangle.
Readtangle.com is the website.
Readtangle.com. And join the 400,000 people reading it right now with Isaac Saul. And if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also watch every episode on your YouTube channel. Please leave a rating and review on your chosen platform. It really helps us reach more listeners and keep the conversation going. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time on No Holding Back.